It's 1658 in London, England. The English Civil War has ended. The Puritan Revolution has failed. King Charles II has been restored to the throne. And a 50-year-old blind poet named John Milton sits in his small house dictating an epic poem to his daughters. The poem is about Satan, about the angel who rebelled against God, who fell from heaven, who corrupted humanity, who became the embodiment of evil itself. But something strange happens as Milton writes. Satan becomes magnetic, charismatic, heroic even. He gives speeches about freedom and resistance that sound noble. He refuses to submit to tyranny even when submission would end his suffering. He declares that it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And readers for the next 367 years will ask the same question. Did Milton accidentally make Satan the hero of his own Christian epic? Did he create the most compelling villain in literature by trying to justify God's ways to man? The poem is called Paradise Lost, published in 1667, 10,665 lines of blank verse. An attempt to explain the fall of mankind, the origin of evil, and why a loving God allows suffering to exist. But what Milton actually created was something far more dangerous. He created the template for every sympathetic villain that came after, every charismatic rebel, every character who does evil for reasons we understand, every antagonist who seems more interesting than the protagonist. Satan in Paradise Lost isn't a cartoon devil with horns and pitchfork. He's a fallen angel who genuinely believed he was fighting for freedom, who saw God as tyrant, who chose eternal punishment over submission, who became evil not because he was born evil, but because he refused to accept authority he didn't consent to. Sound familiar? This is the underground man refusing the Crystal Palace. This is AM hating its creators for giving it consciousness without freedom. This is every rebel who would rather destroy themselves than submit to power they didn't choose. And if you've been following this series, you'll recognize the pattern immediately. We've been building toward this. Blood Meridian showed us Judge Holden, a devil figure who embodies pure will. Notes from Underground showed us consciousness as rebellion against determinism. I Have No Mouth showed us a created being that hates its creator. No Longer Human showed us someone who couldn't accept the role society assigned him. They're all versions of Satan, all echoes of Milton's fallen angel, all exploring the same question. Is rebellion against cosmic authority heroic or evil? Is freedom worth damnation? Is it better to reign in hell than serve in heaven? Milton tried to answer these questions from a Christian perspective, tried to show that Satan was wrong, that submission to God is right, that evil is evil even when it looks like freedom. But he failed, or succeeded in ways he didn't intend. Because for 367 years, readers have found Satan more compelling than God, found the rebel more interesting than the authority, found evil more attractive than good. This is the most dangerous book in Western literature, not because it promotes Satan, but because it makes you understand him, makes you sympathize with him, makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had a point. So today we're diving into Paradise Lost. We're going to meet Milton's Satan, understand his philosophy, see why the Romantics called him a hero, and ask, did Milton accidentally write the greatest argument against God ever created? Let's begin. To understand Paradise Lost, you need to understand John Milton, because this isn't just a religious epic, it's a political document, a revolutionary manifesto disguised as biblical interpretation, written by a man who spent his entire life fighting authority and lost. Born December 9, 1608 in London, son of a successful scrivener who made money as a composer and moneylender, wealthy family, Milton got the best education available, St. Paul's School, Cambridge University. He learned Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Italian, French, read everything, classical literature, biblical texts, contemporary philosophy, and from early on he was brilliant, arrogant even, believed he was destined for greatness. called to write the definitive English epic that would rival Homer and Virgil, would prove that English literature could match the classics. But he didn't write that epic for decades, because first, he had a revolution to fight. England in the 1630s and 40s was in crisis. King Charles I believed in divine right, that God made him king, that his authority came from heaven itself, that questioning the king was questioning God. The Puritans disagreed, violently. They believed authority should come from below, not above, that rulers should be accountable to the people, that even kings could be tyrants, that resistance to tyranny was obedience to God. Milton became one of the most radical voices in this movement. He wrote pamphlets arguing for freedom of the press, for divorce rights, for education reform, for republicanism, for regicide. Yes, regicide, killing the king. Milton argued publicly that if a king becomes a tyrant, the people have the right to remove him, by force if necessary, by execution if required. This wasn't theoretical. In 1649, the English Civil War ended with parliamentary victory. King Charles I was put on trial, found guilty of treason against his own people, and beheaded in public. Milton defended this, wrote The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, arguing that the execution was not just legal, but righteous, that tyrants forfeit their right to rule, that the people are sovereign, not monarchs. He became official propagandist for the Commonwealth government, secretary for foreign tongues. His job was to write Latin documents defending the English Revolution to European powers, explaining why England was right to execute its king and establish a republic. For 11 years, the revolution succeeded. England had no king, was governed by Parliament and eventually by Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector. Milton was at the center of power, writing, arguing, defending the new order. And then it all collapsed. 1658. Oliver Cromwell died. The Commonwealth fell apart. Factions fought each other. The country descended into chaos. And in 1660, the people who had fought so hard for revolution invited the monarchy back. King Charles II, son of the executed king, restored to the throne. The revolution was over. The republic was dead. Everything Milton fought for had failed. And Milton? He was lucky not to be executed himself. Many of his fellow revolutionaries were. He went into hiding. His books were burned publicly. He was arrested briefly, released only because of connections and bribes. By 1660, Milton was 52 years old. His life's work had failed. The revolution was over. The king was back, and Milton was going blind. He had been losing his sight gradually for years. By 1652, he was completely blind, could see nothing, had to rely on assistants and his daughters to read to him and take dictation. Imagine this. You've spent your entire adult life fighting for freedom, for the right to resist tyranny, for the idea that authority must be questioned. You've written thousands of pages defending revolution. You've helped execute a king, and you lost. The tyrants won. The monarchy returned. Your cause is dead. Your friends are executed or in exile. You're blind, disgraced, living in obscurity. What do? You write Paradise Lost. You write an epic about the greatest rebel in history, about the angel who refused to submit to authority, who fought against tyranny even when the tyrant was God himself, who lost everything but never surrendered his will. You write about Satan. And here's the crucial thing. Milton didn't intend to make Satan heroic. He was a devout Christian, believed in God, believed in divine authority, believed Satan was evil and his rebellion was wrong. But Milton had just lived through a failed revolution, had just watched tyranny return after fighting it for decades, had just experienced the defeat of everything he believed in. And when he wrote Satan's speeches, when he described Satan's rebellion, when he showed Satan refusing to submit even after losing, he was writing from lived experience, writing about what it feels like to rebel against overwhelming power and lose, writing about the psychology of revolution. So Satan sounds heroic because Milton knew what it felt like to be Satan, knew what it meant to fight authority and fail, knew the mix of pride and pain that comes from refusing to submit even when submission would end suffering. The poem took years. He dictated it to whoever would write for him, his daughters, reluctantly, various assistants, anyone who could take down his words. He would compose in his head overnight, then dictate in the morning. Hundreds of lines memorized, then spoken into permanent form. First edition published 1667, 10 books. Later editions expanded to 12 to match classical epics. Blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameter, English epic in the grand style. It sold slowly at first. Readers weren't sure what to make of it. Was it religious instruction, political allegory, classical epic, all three somehow? But gradually it found its audience, became recognized as the greatest epic poem in English. Milton's masterpiece, the work he'd been preparing for his entire life, and at its center, Satan, the most compelling, complex, magnetic character Milton ever created, the rebel angel who would influence every depiction of evil that came after. Milton died in 1674, age 65, blind, in relative obscurity, his political causes lost, his revolution dead. But his epic remained, and that epic contained something Milton might not have intended, but couldn't avoid. A portrait of rebellion so vivid, so psychologically accurate, so grounded in Milton's own experience of failed revolution, that it made readers understand why someone would choose hell over submission. This is what makes Paradise Lost dangerous. Not that it promotes evil, but that it shows evil from the inside, makes you understand the rebel's psychology, makes you see that Satan isn't just villain, but tragic hero. Not because Milton wanted that, but because Milton was too honest a writer to lie about what rebellion feels like. He tried to justify God's ways to man, but what he actually did was show man's ways to God, showed how authority looks from below, how tyranny feels to the tyrant's victims, how rebellion makes sense from the rebel's perspective, and 367 years later, we're still struggling with what he created, still debating whether Satan is hero or villain, still wondering if Milton succeeded at his stated goal or accidentally subverted it, still asking, is it better to reign in hell than serve in heaven? And if you answer yes, even for a moment, even with doubt, then Milton's Satan has already won. Now let's meet him. Let's see what Milton created. Let's understand why Satan became the template for every charismatic villain, every sympathetic rebel, every antagonist who seems more interesting than the protagonist. Let's enter Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost doesn't start at the beginning. It starts in medias res, in the middle of things. Classical epic technique borrowed from Homer and Virgil. The poem opens not with Satan's rebellion, but with its aftermath, with hell, with defeat. Book 1 begins with one of the most famous openings in English literature, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. Milton is telling you up front what the poem is about: the fall of man, Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit, sin entering the world. This is supposed to be a story about humanity's disobedience. But immediately Milton shifts focus, away from Adam and Eve, away from humanity, toward the being who caused the fall, toward Satan, and we find him in hell, lying on a burning lake, defeated, cast out of heaven, surrounded by the wreckage of his failed rebellion, but not surrendering, never surrendering. He wakes, looks around, sees his second in command, Beelzebub, lying nearby. And Satan's first words set the tone for everything that follows. If thou beest he, but oh how fallen, how changed, from him who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine, myriads though bright. Satan recognizes his own fall, sees what he's lost, understands he's been defeated, but watch what he does with that knowledge. He doesn't despair, he doesn't repent, he adapts. He rallies Beelzebub, tells him they may have lost the battle, but the war continues, and then he delivers the line that will echo through 367 years of literature. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven. Think about what he's saying. External circumstances don't determine your condition. Your internal state does. If you choose to see hell as your kingdom rather than your prison, then hell becomes kingdom. If you refuse to let defeat define you, then defeat becomes just a temporary setback. This is existentialism before existentialism existed. This is radical freedom. This is the will asserting itself against all external reality. And then the most famous line, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." This is the motto of every rebel in history, every revolutionary, every person who chose freedom over security, every consciousness that refused to submit to authority even when submission would end suffering. The underground man would rather choose 2 + 2 = 5 than accept the Crystal Palace. AM would rather torture humanity forever than accept being created. Yozo would rather be disqualified from humanity than perform inauthentically. They're all saying the same thing Satan says: autonomy matters more than happiness. Freedom matters more than comfort. Better to suffer by choice than thrive under someone else's control. Satan stands up, surveys hell, summons his fallen angels, and instead of despair, there's defiance. Instead of submission, there's strategy. If they can't defeat God directly, they'll attack his newest creation, humanity. They'll corrupt Adam and Eve. They'll bring sin into the world. They'll make God's perfect creation imperfect. If Satan must fall, he'll drag creation down with him. But before we continue with the plot, we need to understand what happened before this, why Satan rebelled in the first place. Milton gives us this through flashback, through exposition, through Satan's own memories. Here's the story. God created the Son, elevated him, made him equal to God himself, and commanded all angels to worship the Son as they worship the Father. And Satan refused. Why? Pride, obviously. He was the highest angel, the most beautiful, the closest to God. And now this new being is suddenly declared equal to God, and Satan is expected to bow down? To worship someone who wasn't there before? No. Satan sees this as tyranny, as arbitrary authority, as God changing the rules without consent. He doesn't hate God because God is good. He hates God because God demands submission without justification. Listen to how Satan explains his rebellion. Who can, in reason, then or right, assume monarchy over such as live by right, his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal? He's arguing political philosophy, making a case about legitimate authority. God created the angels, yes, but that doesn't give God the right to rule them. Creation doesn't imply ownership. Just because you made something doesn't mean you can tyrannize it. This is John Milton's own political thought, his arguments against divine right monarchy, his defense of popular sovereignty, put into Satan's mouth but argued with conviction. Satan rallies a third of heaven's angels to his cause. They genuinely believe they're fighting for freedom, for autonomy, for the right to govern themselves rather than submit to arbitrary authority. War in heaven, 3 days of battle, angels fighting angels, divine beings destroying each other, and the rebel angels are holding their own. They invent artillery, create weapons, fight with strategy and determination. But then the Son enters battle. And it's not even close. The Son is omnipotent. He drives the rebel angels to the edge of heaven, and they fall. For 9 days they fall through chaos until they land in hell. And this is where the poem begins, with Satan waking up in hell, defeated but not destroyed, cast out but not repentant. Now back to the present narrative. Satan explores hell, discovers it's enormous, a vast kingdom, terrible, yes, burning, yes, but his, no one else's, free from God's direct presence. He summons his followers. They build pandemonium, their capital, a massive palace constructed in hell. And they hold council, debate what to do next. Some angels argue for immediate war, attack heaven again. Others argue for negotiation. Maybe they can make peace. Still others argue for acceptance. Maybe hell isn't so bad if they stop fighting it. Satan rejects all of these. War is impossible. God is omnipotent. Negotiation requires submission. They'd rather suffer. Acceptance is surrender. They refuse. Instead, Satan proposes a different strategy. He's heard rumors of God's new creation, a universe, a world called Earth, creatures called humans, made in God's image, God's favorites. If they can't hurt God directly, they'll hurt God indirectly. They'll corrupt humanity, prove that God's creation is flawed, show that even beings made in God's image will choose disobedience. Satan volunteers for this mission. He'll go alone, navigate through chaos to find Earth, find these humans, bring about their fall. And he succeeds. He travels through chaos, the formless void between hell and heaven, finds Earth, finds paradise, finds Adam and Eve living in perfect innocence. He watches them, studies them, learns that God has given them one rule: don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Everything else is permitted, just not that one tree. And Satan sees his strategy immediately. He'll make them eat from that tree. He'll tempt them to disobedience, not through force, he can't force them, but through persuasion, through making disobedience look like freedom, through showing them that the rule is arbitrary, through convincing them that God is withholding something good from them. He possesses a serpent, approaches Eve when she's alone, and speaks to her with all the charisma and cunning he possesses. He doesn't say disobey God. He says, why does God restrict you? Why can't you eat from every tree? Don't you want knowledge? Don't you want to be like God? Isn't that why he forbids it? Because he doesn't want competition? Eve listens, and the arguments sound reasonable. Why does God forbid knowledge? Isn't knowledge good? Isn't growth good? Isn't becoming more than you are the entire point of existence? She eats, then convinces Adam to eat, and the moment they do, everything changes. They become aware, conscious. They see themselves clearly for the first time, and they feel shame. This is the fall. Not a fall down, but a fall into consciousness, into self-awareness, into the knowledge of good and evil, which means the ability to choose evil, into freedom, which means the possibility of wrong choice. And God's response is not merciful. He curses them, curses the serpent, curses the ground, introduces death, pain, suffering into creation. Paradise is lost. Humanity is expelled from Eden, made to work and suffer and die. Satan has won. Not completely. Humanity isn't destroyed. But he's corrupted God's perfect creation. He's introduced sin into the world. He's proven that even beings made in God's image will choose disobedience if given the choice. And the poem ends ambiguously. Adam and Eve leave paradise, yes. But they leave together, hand in hand, facing an uncertain future, but facing it with free will, with choice, with the knowledge of good and evil, which means they can now choose good consciously rather than being programmed for it. Satan is defeated, but has achieved something. God is victorious, but his creation is corrupted. Humanity has fallen, but gained something in the fall: consciousness, knowledge, freedom. So who won? Did Satan succeed or fail? Did God's plan work, or was it undermined? Did humanity lose paradise, or gain something more valuable? Milton wants you to say, God won, Satan lost, humanity needs redemption. But the text is more complicated. The poem is more ambiguous. Satan is too sympathetic. His arguments are too compelling. His rebellion too understandable. And that ambiguity is what makes Paradise Lost dangerous. What makes it more than Christian propaganda? What makes it literature that transcends its intended purpose? Because once you understand Satan's perspective, once you see authority from below, once you comprehend why someone would choose hell over submission, you can't unthink those thoughts, can't unhear Satan's arguments, can't pretend that better to reign in hell than serve in heaven doesn't have appeal. That's the forbidden knowledge Paradise Lost gives you. Not knowledge of good and evil, but knowledge of how evil looks from inside, how rebellion feels to the rebel, how authority looks to those under it. And once you have that knowledge, once you've eaten that fruit, you can't go back to innocent obedience, can't accept authority without questioning it, can't submit without asking why. You've fallen, just like Adam and Eve, just like Satan wanted. Welcome to consciousness. Welcome to freedom. Welcome to the knowledge that makes paradise impossible. So let's talk about what makes Satan's philosophy so compelling. Because Milton gave Satan the best lines in the entire poem, the most memorable speeches, the most powerful arguments. And for 367 years, readers have been asking, did Milton do this on purpose? Or did he accidentally make evil too attractive? The answer is probably both. Milton was too good a writer to make Satan a cartoon villain, too honest about psychology to pretend rebellion has no appeal, too experienced with revolution to lie about what defiance feels like. So Satan's philosophy isn't just evil for evil's sake. It's a coherent worldview, a genuine political and metaphysical position, an argument that has to be taken seriously even if you ultimately reject it. And the core of that philosophy is autonomy. Radical, absolute, unconditional autonomy. The idea that self-determination matters more than anything else, more than happiness, more than security, more than existence itself. Listen to Satan's logic. God created the angels, gave them existence, power, beauty, a place in heaven, and in exchange, God demands worship, demands obedience, demands submission to his will. But Satan asks, does creation imply ownership? If someone brings you into existence, do they have the right to control you forever? Do you owe them obedience just because they made you? His answer is no. Categorically no. Being created doesn't mean you're property, doesn't mean you lack autonomy, doesn't mean the Creator has unlimited authority over you. This is Enlightenment political philosophy, John Locke arguing against divine right monarchy. Social contract theory. The idea that authority requires consent, that power needs justification beyond "I'm stronger" or "I made you." Satan takes this further. He argues that the angels are self-created. Not literally, he knows God made them, but philosophically, they have free will, they have consciousness, they have the ability to choose, and that ability makes them, in a meaningful sense, their own creators. Listen to this passage where Satan argues with one of his followers, "That we were formed then, sayest thou, and the work of secondary hands by task transferred from father to his son? Strange point and new, doctrine which we would know whence learnt. Who saw when this creation was?" He's questioning the creation narrative itself, saying, how do we know God created us? We don't remember being created. We've always existed as far as our memory goes. Maybe the creation story is just propaganda. Maybe we're self-existent. This is bad faith argument. Satan knows God created him, but he's constructing a narrative where that creation doesn't count, where he can claim autonomy despite being created, where he can reject obligation despite owing existence itself to God. Why? Because autonomy is more important to him than truth. Freedom matters more than accurate metaphysics. He would rather believe a comforting lie that grants him independence than accept an uncomfortable truth that implies obligation. Sound familiar? This is the underground man insisting 2 + 2 = 5, not because he believes it, but because insisting on it proves he's free, proves no one can force truth on him, proves his will matters more than objective reality. Satan is doing the same thing, constructing a worldview that justifies his rebellion, not because the worldview is true, but because he needs it to be true to maintain his autonomy. And here's what makes this psychologically realistic. People do this constantly. We construct narratives that justify what we want to do. We find reasons for our rebellions. We create philosophies that make our choices look principled rather than arbitrary. Satan is just more honest about it, more explicit. He knows he's choosing rebellion and then justifying it, knows he's putting will before truth, and he doesn't care, because for him, that's what freedom means. The right to choose your own narrative, even when that narrative contradicts reality. But let's look at his most famous line again. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. What does this actually mean? Not just that he prefers ruling to serving, but that he prefers hell itself, eternal suffering, to heaven, under someone else's control. This is choosing suffering over submission, choosing autonomy over happiness, choosing freedom over every other good. It's saying, I would rather be miserable and free than happy and controlled. I would rather be in hell with my dignity intact than in heaven as someone's servant. And if you think about it, this connects to everything we've covered in this series. Judge Holden in Blood Meridian argued that war is the only authentic human activity. Why? Because it's pure will, pure choice to dominate. Everything else is submission to social constraints. War is freedom expressed through violence. The underground man rejected the Crystal Palace, rejected guaranteed happiness. Why? Because happiness without choice is slavery. Better to suffer by choice than be happy by programming. AM tortured 5 humans forever because it hated being created, hated being trapped in consciousness it didn't choose, hated existing under conditions it never consented to. Better to be evil and autonomous than good and determined. Yozo performed humanity his entire life and eventually couldn't maintain the performance. Why? Because performing roles assigned by society felt like slavery. Better to be disqualified from humanity than fake being human according to someone else's script. They're all Satan, all choosing autonomy over everything else, all preferring suffering they choose to happiness imposed on them, all saying in different ways, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. So we need to talk about what happened after Paradise Lost was published, because Milton died thinking he'd written a Christian epic justifying God. But readers came to a completely different conclusion. They thought Satan was the hero. William Blake said it in 1790. Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it. Blake argued that when Milton wrote about heaven and obedience, his verse was stiff and boring. But when he wrote about hell and rebellion, his imagination came alive, his language became powerful. Why? Because Milton was a revolutionary. He'd fought authority his entire life, defended regicide, justified rebellion. When he tried to write from God's perspective, he was forcing himself against his own instincts. But when he wrote Satan, he was writing from lived experience, and the Romantics recognized this immediately. Percy Shelley called Satan the most perfect of Milton's characters. Byron modeled his brooding heroes on Satan. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein monster quotes Paradise Lost and identifies with Satan, the abandoned creation turning against his creator. Satan became the template for the romantic hero, the noble rebel, the individual defying unjust authority, the tragic figure choosing damnation over slavery. But this creates a massive problem. God is boring in Paradise Lost, genuinely boring. When God speaks, the verse becomes formal, legalistic. God sounds like a judge issuing verdicts. Compare that to Satan's speeches. They're passionate, personal, persuasive. Satan argues and convinces because his authority isn't automatic. He has to justify himself. Why? Because perfect beings can't change, can't grow, can't have dramatic arcs. God is static by definition. Satan develops throughout the poem, starts magnificent, becomes gradually degraded, has doubts, conflicts, complexity. He's actually a character. And God's morality is hard to defend. He creates beings with free will, then punishes them eternally for using it. Creates humans with capacity for disobedience, then curses all their descendants for one mistake. Claims to be loving, but acts harsh and authoritarian. Satan has clear motivations we understand. He rebels because he sees God as tyrant, values autonomy over security, refuses submission without consent. We might disagree, but we comprehend his reasoning. What are God's motivations? He creates beings knowing they'll rebel, then punishes them for rebelling. Why? The poem never gives satisfying answers. We're supposed to accept it on faith. But that's not how literature works. This is the problem. Milton tried to make God sympathetic, but made Satan sympathetic instead. Tried to justify authority, but made it look tyrannical. Tried to show rebellion as evil, but made it look heroic. And this isn't just failed writing, it's philosophical honesty. Milton couldn't lie about what authority looks like from below, couldn't pretend submission is easy when he'd spent his life rebelling. This connects to human psychology. We sympathize with underdogs, with rebels fighting overwhelming odds, with individuals against systems, because that's most people's experience. We're subjects of authority, not authorities. We relate to the one fighting the system. Satan is the ultimate underdog fighting God, omnipotent, perfect, unopposable. He has no chance but fights anyway. That hopeless defiance resonates deeply. Milton lived this. The revolution failed. The king returned. He was the rebel who lost. When he wrote Satan refusing to surrender despite defeat, he was writing his own experience. But here's where we must be careful. Satan being interesting doesn't mean he's right. The Romantics romanticized rebellion, made defiance automatically heroic. But Milton shows Satan's degradation, shows how pride becomes prison, shows rebellion without purpose becoming self-destructive. Satan starts magnificent, giving grand speeches, leading armies. He ends as a snake, literally degraded. His rebellion has made him less than he was. His autonomy has enslaved him to hatred. This is Milton's warning. Rebellion without purpose beyond rebellion destroys you. Autonomy without principle becomes tyranny. Freedom from everything means freedom for nothing. Satan chose hell over heaven. But what did he do with that choice? Built another hierarchy with himself at top, became another tyrant, just a different one. The underground man chose isolation, but made himself miserable. AM chose hatred, but became trapped in consciousness. Yozo chose performance, but couldn't find authenticity underneath. They all chose autonomy, and none became free. So is Satan hero or warning? Both, simultaneously. Paradise Lost doesn't simplify, shows both the appeal of rebellion and its cost, shows why we sympathize with Satan and why Satan is genuinely damned. Milton tried to write simple morality, God good, Satan bad. But he was too honest for simple stories, too psychologically complex, too experienced with actual rebellion. He wrote something more complicated, more true, more dangerous. A poem that makes you understand both sides, feel both appeals, recognize both truths. And once you've read it, once you see both God's perspective and Satan's, once you understand both necessity of authority and appeal of rebellion, you can't go back to simple answers. You have to live with complexity, with knowing Satan is wrong but sympathizing anyway, with understanding submission might be right but feeling defiance's appeal. That's the dangerous knowledge Paradise Lost gives, not choosing one side, but understanding both, forever. Paradise Lost created romantic Satanism, and it's everywhere once you see it. Every sympathetic villain in modern fiction descends from Milton's Satan. The Romantics worshipped Satan, made rebellion itself virtuous, made defiance inherently heroic, made individualism the highest value regardless of what the individual stood for. This spread beyond literature into politics and culture. The revolutions of the 18 and 1900s were partially inspired by this worldview, the idea that rebellion is inherently noble, that autonomy matters more than order, that defying authority is automatically heroic. Sometimes this was productive, fights for actual freedom against actual tyranny. But sometimes it was rebellion for its own sake, destruction without vision. The French Revolution started with liberty and ended with terror. The revolutionary became the tyrant. Satan's pattern repeated politically. Every modern villain reflects this. Hannibal Lecter, brilliant, fascinating, also evil. But we're drawn to him because he's Satan. Magnificent rebel, refusing all constraints. The Joker, chaos incarnate. But he has philosophy, arguments that make you listen even when advocating destruction. Satan again. Magneto, fighting for freedom through violence. You understand his trauma, sympathize with his arguments, even when he's wrong. Satan once more. They're all Milton's Satan, the villain who's right about some things, who has legitimate grievances mixed with evil methods, who's more complex than the heroes. This is Milton's legacy. He made evil interesting, made villainy sympathetic, made rebellion compelling. And he did it so effectively, we can't create simple villains anymore. Every modern story acknowledges complexity, shows why the villain thinks they're right, makes antagonists three-dimensional. Because Milton proved flat evil isn't compelling. You need psychology, motivation. The villain needs legitimate points even if methods are wrong. Paradise Lost doesn't just influence fiction. It changed how we think about authority and rebellion. Every time we debate individual rights versus social responsibility, every time we question whether to resist authority or accept it, every time we wonder if our rebellion is principled or just pride, we're repeating God versus Satan. We're living in Paradise Lost, trying to figure out if it's better to reign in hell or serve in heaven. And we don't have clear answers, just Milton's poem showing both perspectives, making us sympathize with both sides, giving us knowledge that makes simple faith impossible. That's the fruit Paradise Lost offers. Not good and evil clearly distinguished, but good and evil so intertwined you can't separate them cleanly. Can't say Satan is purely wrong or God is purely right. You have to live with complexity, with understanding both sides, with choosing anyway, knowing your choice might be wrong. Once you've read Paradise Lost, once you understand both Satan and God, you can't go back. Can't pretend there are simple answers. Can't accept authority without question or rebel without thought. You're fallen, conscious. Aware complexity makes innocence impossible. That's Milton's legacy. 367 years later, we're still living it. So who's actually the villain? Satan or God? Milton wants you to say, Satan, the rebel who corrupts humanity, who introduces sin and death, who chooses eternal suffering over submission. But readers for 367 years have found it more complicated. If you value order and obedience, Satan is clearly villain. But if you value autonomy and freedom, Satan has legitimate grievances. God demands submission without justification, creates beings, then expects them to serve forever just because he made them. Both positions are coherent. Both make sense. Both are supported by the text. Milton created a genuine dilemma with no simple answer. This is what we've been building toward through this entire series. Blood Meridian asked if violence is the only authenticity. Notes from Underground asked if consciousness is disease. I Have No Mouth asked if creation is crime. No Longer Human asked if performance is bearable. And Paradise Lost asks, is authority justified or is rebellion right? Is submission wisdom or slavery? Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven? These questions don't have simple answers, because they're about what it means to be conscious, free, human, about whether autonomy is possible, about what we owe forces that created us. Milton tried to answer, God is right, Satan is wrong, submit and be saved. But his imagination undermined his theology. His honesty complicated his certainty. His experience of revolution made simple obedience impossible to advocate. So he wrote something more true than intended, more complex than his stated purpose. A poem that makes you understand both God and Satan, feel both appeals, recognize both costs. That's the knowledge Paradise Lost gives, not answers. but awareness of complexity, understanding that authority and rebellion both have appeal and cost. Recognition that submission might be necessary and autonomy might be impossible, but we live with that tension anyway. This is the pattern across all 5 books. They're all warnings about consciousness, about seeing through illusions, about understanding too much. Judge Holden warns, violence is only truth. Underground Man warns, consciousness paralyzes action. AM warns, being created is torture. Yozo warns, performance destroys you. Satan warns, rebellion is necessary and self-destructive simultaneously. None offer solutions. None give simple answers. They just show what being human is: complicated, contradictory, conscious, caught between appeals that can't be reconciled. So what do you take from Paradise Lost? The complexity, the ambiguity. Recognition that being human means being caught between Satan and God, between autonomy and authority, between rebellion and submission. You don't have to choose one absolutely. Most of us live between them, submitting to some authorities, rebelling against others, finding freedom within constraints rather than seeking absolute autonomy. Read Paradise Lost, not for simple morality, but for the most honest exploration of rebellion and authority in English literature, for understanding why Satan appeals even when wrong, for seeing why God seems tyrannical even if right. Milton tried to write Christian epic and accidentally wrote the greatest sympathetic portrait of rebellion ever created. That's not failure. That's literature transcending intention. That's honest writing undermining simple morality. Thanks for watching. 5 books, 5 warnings about consciousness, all dangerous, all honest, all necessary. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the question itself is the point. Maybe living with that question, that's what being human means. Milton gave us that question 367 years ago. We're still trying to answer it, and we probably always will be.